Hi, I'm Sébastien Foucaud. I'm the Chief Data Officer of HRS Group, and it's really my pleasure today to be contributing to this conference of the Data Innovation Summit 2020. So I'm going to share with you my experience in the past few years and focusing in particular to my experience at HRS on building data functions and how we can building them while the company is actually going fast, and give you some tips on what have been working for us and advices on how you could set up your own data functions in your own company. But before doing that, I would like to introduce briefly HRS. So HRS is a company in the travel business. HRS is actually the market leader for corporate lodging. Essentially, we provide lodging, the world's premier lodging experience to corporations globally. We want to help those organizations to reach their targets in terms of savings, but in terms of quality of travel as well. The company is around 1,000 people wide. We are working in almost all the world markets worldwide. And we have contact partners with hotels globally, more than 800,000, and more than 3,000 customers currently. So essentially what HRS is doing when corporate partners are working with us, we are basically outsourcing entirely their discussion with the hotels for everything that's around booking and lodging. So we have 3 different products that we propose to our corporations. The first one is around sourcing. So it's essentially the procurement work where we negotiate on the behalf of the corporates with hotels the best deal in the destinations where the corporates believe that their employees are going to travel for conferences or for meeting other employees. So this is the first part. The second part is around search and book. So we propose access to booking and searching the right accommodation at the right destination for the travelers. And the last part is around payment, where we actually process the entire payment round to make sure that the travel of the travelers is as stressless and touchless as possible. That means that for a traveler, typically that would mean going to the hotel, check-in, check-out, but you don't have to process invoicing and payments. Everything is handled by HRS. And from the data perspective, because this is my personal interest, it's a great end-to-end product that we're having here, because we can obviously collect data to optimize the portfolio of hotels for the corporates via sourcing. So there's a lot of algorithms and machine learning on the back end. Of course, when it's about optimizing the search for the travelers in the recommendation engine, for instance, and finally automate as much as possible everything that is around payment. And we can also cross-seed information and data across this different part of the platform. So, you're probably aware that we've been through a very unique and difficult crisis recently worldwide, and my industry, travel industry, has been particularly hit. In the mid of February, I was personally traveling to India for personal reasons, and that's when we started to talk within the HRS about the crisis that was ongoing in China at the time. And I remember that coming back to Germany, and actually one of my colleagues was stuck in Italy, in Rome, due to the recent lockdown. So we have been watching this crisis developing on most real basis, seeing one day to the other, the lockdown appearing everywhere, and basically the flow of travel completely stopping. It's been extremely worrisome and difficult time for the company and for us as employees. Lots of questioning about the future of the company, about the future of the industry. And essentially what I would like to talk with you today is how the right setup, the right team, the right way, and the right usage of the data within the company helped us going through that so far. Also, we all know that We haven't recovered from the crisis yet, and it's going to impact the travel industry for a long-standing period. So we are thinking about several years. We may have risk to see a further lockdown occurring again if a second wave occurs. So this is not that the crisis is behind us, but I think the way that we have been building up our teams and the way we're using data in the company really helped us to go through these first stages of the crisis. So brave, don't panic, just basically base every decision on facts and data, and make sure that your team is actually resilient through this type of crisis. In particular, everyone at home and home office, you need to have the right processes in place for the team to be functioning properly during this type of changes. So we're talking about data analytics here, obviously, and well, I don't have to convince you that data is critical for companies, but essentially the way I say it, it helps to create the transparency that is required and the objectivity for taking the right decision. And we need to make sure that our counterpart in the company, when you're representing data as I do today, trust the data they're getting, that they are used as ground for right decision making, and also for the optimization, and obviously all the machine learning and automation processes that are going from that. And this is what is in picture that has a better idea. I mean, essentially, we always want to check hypotheses around data, and that's the way every company should work. And the difficulty that we have as a data function is how we can make sure that our business partners have access to the right data, and B, have the right ways and means and understanding of it to take the best decisions for the company. So data is going through typically 3 different stages or 3 different levels of usage of the data. All of them are very equally important. It's not like one is more important than the other. It's not that you need to go through those different, let's say, phases in successively. You can do that in parallel, but they have very different impact on the business, but also, of course, higher impact with higher complexity. So the first stage is what typically we talk about descriptive analytics, which is reporting essentially. It's extremely critical. That's probably 80% currently of the decisions are taken at this stage, actually, just looking backward what happened. Then, of course, as a data function, you want to support the next stage. So based on those reports and the historical data, try to understand why things are happening. So deep diving, that requires usually a bit more advanced understanding of data analytics or even data science sometimes. Then we can also do predictive analytics, where data science playground, let's say, it's where we're using data to predict or forecast and really help to understand what's going to happen next. And finally, this is the realm of artificial intelligence and machine learning, predictive analytics, where data is not only used to build up model, but actually the full cycle of automation is there. And then algorithms are taking the best decision, or optimized decisions according to the information that's coming into the system. So this is important to understand that companies have different views of these different stages. They don't need to use all of them, depending on the maturity of the company. But eventually, this is really the grail, is that we can leverage entirely the data that we have access to and be able to go through all the different stages. And for that, you cannot just rely on a core data team and data functions. You need to make sure that you actually have spread the knowledge around data, and in particular the habits and the understanding of how to use data to take the best decision across the organization. I will repeat that several times in a few minutes, but it's essentially data is not the thing of the data people. It's really need to be spread across the organization, that everyone can leverage the information to take the best decisions. So this is generally what we call data democratization. And for me, this is really the most important part. It's to make sure that in the product teams, in the business teams, everyone can really use data. And that's what, for me, a data function is about, is how we can enable and democratize usage of data. So there is a lot of questions that I will come back later on governance and ownership. And then the next step, I mentioned that already, is using data for automations, data as a data product. building up products that are fed directly on the data and incorporate the data in the cycle of software development. Everywhere we can, everywhere we should use machine learning essentially instead of traditional software. So how we can bring the company to be able to do that. So there are three fundamental pillars there to be able to really leverage data and data technology. The first one is the technology itself. So making sure that we have the right environment and the right technology in place for the company to leverage it. The second is around talent. Do we have the right people in the organization, in the data function, but outside of the data function as well, and how to train and hire and organize. And the last part is probably the most tricky one, is the culture, because you need to really solve difficult problems like ownership around data and the different stages of data in the organization. And again, data is the problem of everyone. So you really need to make sure that you have a shift in culture, not only about the responsibility and ownership, but also the usage of the data and change the mindset of the people. Right? So shifting away from guts feeling that sometimes are actually very appropriate, but more with towards a data-driven culture. So in terms of culture, in terms of technology, sorry, what is very important to remember, especially on the product side, but it's also true for the entire ecosystem of data, is that what we see, so when we talk about artificial intelligence, we always refer to machine learning and algorithms and the core of it. But actually the part that is related to algorithms is a very tiny part of what is needed to be put in place to really put machine learning at scale in the company. So we have essentially what you see here, the small part in the middle, which is really the machine learning core, but that requires us to have set up the right infrastructure, managing the right libraries, and leverage the data collection and data management across the company, making sure that we have the right data quality. There's all the phases of pre-processing, because usually the raw data is not usable as such for machine learning, analysis, extraction features, and all the parts also on the testing, so offline and online testing, or A/B testing, depending on the type of business you're in. And this entire ecosystem needs to be put in place. It's not just about data science and machine learning. And essentially, what you want to organize your company around is two ways of dealing with data, and along with them are different type of skills and expertise and different type of infrastructure. So there's usually we base everything on one place where to aggregate all the data, like a data lake. But even there, you will probably want to have two different type of streams, batch streams, usually leveraging data warehouses, in which you will have highly curated and informed data that is very well controlled and understood and structured, that will represent maybe 20% of the overall data set that you have. And then more, let's say, an analytic and machine learning stream, where you have more, let's say, less structured or less curated information, more unstructured data, and more people or less people, but more data to be used for, and in a faster way. So every time you have a new source of information that you want your data scientists and analysts to leverage, you just don't want that to go through your data warehouse. You want just to have access to it directly through your analytic hubs, for instance. So essentially, from a technological perspective, if you want to serve the main part, the bulk of the company, you will still need to have structured and curated information. But if you really want to move towards what I mentioned before, prescriptive analytics or even predictive analytics, you really need also to have this faster and less curated access to data. So it's this dual structure that you need to put in place. So the next stage, technology is never really the biggest problem, to be honest, to solve. Especially nowadays, the access threshold to this type of technology with AutoML, with the cloud-based computing, etc., it's getting easier. There are lots of managed services out there. But then the next biggest step, and the most problematic one, is really to change the culture around data in your company. If you want to recreate a data-driven environment and make sure, as much as your company grow, you not only need to rely on technology, you really need to change the culture within the company. And there are several principles, right? We all say commonly that culture, it's a strategy for breakfast. But for me, it's something that I keep repeating for years now, is that the data is owned by the business and not by the data function. So essentially, this is the message that you need to train your partners and stakeholders with. is that they are more responsible of the data than actually you are the data expert. My responsibility as a data function is to make sure that everyone in the company can access to the data, can leverage the power of the data, or providing the tools for them to work with it. But we are not responsible of the data, simply because we are not producing it usually, and we are not the end of users of it. So the quality control needs to be done by the business stakeholders. We need to understand how they want to use data before it's ingested at first. So data governance is an essential component of the entire, let's say, landscape of data. You need to define clear ownership. That's true. You need to make sure that people understand their responsibility in terms of production of data, where to put it, how to inform the rest of the company of its presence, what it's used for, being responsible of its quality, but also the usage of it. So being responsible of the matrices that are developed around the data, how the KPIs are developed for your particular sub-team, for instance. You should be empowered and responsible of it. And even if you bring and use data to discuss and sales cases to the customer, you should be, as a salesperson, responsible of the data that you display, and numbers you display, which you have checked. So this is a very important part. For that, we need to enforce processes, obviously, which are covered in structure in the company. And of course, there is technology that you want to leverage, notably around data curation. So data governance is probably the first things that you want to focus on in terms of culture. The second part, I mentioned it, but I really want to emphasize on data quality, because it is always the bottleneck, always the bottleneck. And I hear commonly that we have all the data that we need to do that. Shouldn't be so difficult. Yeah, well, as written on the slide, you may be surrounded by water, but die of thirst. If you're on a raft in the middle of the ocean, you have no water to drink. Same applies with data. You could have a lot of data around you, but at the end, it may not be the right quality. It may not be the right data for the right use cases that you have. So it's not about having data. It's really about to have the right data, which for me ensure also that you have a higher quality, because you understand why you collect the data for, so you can measure the quality because you know the purpose of it. And lead me to the next big principle is you need to avoid data cluttering, because if you understand the previous point on data quality, you will see immediately the relationship here. You can, it's not because you collect a lot of data that you will solve your problems. You need to understand the data you collect. You need to understand why you want to collect it. So you collect only what is necessary, because if you start flooding your infrastructure with data that is useless, or filling up your data warehouse with tables with information that no one cares about, then you basically lose control. You have low quality data, your performances of the system is going down. So just focus on the data that you want and you need. You control or monitor the data flow. And I think this is a principle that applies for everything. So it's usually called, referred as the Lean principle. I had a long background in academia. For me, this is just the basic scientific methodology, and it will apply for business as well, especially when you start playing with data. So essentially, you want to process by iterations. You're making an hypothesis, checking it with the data, measuring if you don't have the information, so create an experiment, measure, and then iterate on it until you can basically take the right decision. So it's a continuous process, and you need to move away from the solution is there in the data. There always will be cycles, there will always be hypotheses that you need to take, and you always will have to iterate. And that's true for product development as well, obviously. So the last point that I want to make is around people, around talent. So obviously, as I said, technology is probably not the hardest part. Culture is very difficult to implement, but you want overall to surround yourself in your data function, but also outside of it with the right people, and where to find them and how to train them. So here are our famous data crowd. I think the term of data scientist is getting more and more overrated, in the sense that it starts encompassing many different types of profiles. So the definition that we had almost 10 years ago when it's been coined to today have been evolving, and I think we're starting to mix everyone wants to be a data scientist, everyone is one, and I think it's really important that we are clear about what you expect from this type of profiles. So for me, at HRS, we created this is of 4 types of profiles. that are well defined. So the data scientist, which is essentially the person responsible of developing model and enhanced analytics as well. Then we have the data analyst that's focusing more on the analytics and the reporting side. So a bit less modeling, but a bit more business, let's say, acumen in there, and being also to be able to, for both roles, to be able to communicate with the stakeholders as much as possible. Then on the more software engineering and engineering side, we'll have in one hand what I call the machine learning engineer, which is very commonly today also called data scientist. For me, the machine learning engineer share a lot of commonalities with the data scientists in terms of understanding the models, but the responsibility of the machine learning engineer is really to bring the model at scale in production, where the data scientist will be more working on the optimization of the model itself, sometimes just for insights and analytics. So there's a component of engineering that is very important in the machine learning engineer. And the last let's say, profile here that is really critical and probably getting more and more critical is the data engineer. So it's basically type of software engineer that have specializations around big data technology, and this type of people that are able to build pipelines to bring all those data or directly to the customer, or in the reporting tool, or in the different algorithms. And with now solutions, managed solutions around auto machine learning, auto ML, with more and more easy access to visualization. I think the importance of data engineer is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's actually for me the biggest, the most difficult profile to hire today. We should not forget that actually these are different specialties, but they need to work together. And that goes beyond just the data people. So you need to be able to integrate, I'll come back to that in a minute, to integrate your data people within the entire landscape in the company, from product owners down to a software engineer, right? And here we have a bit more complex chart of who is doing what, and essentially, but what I like to present in general is let's say the spectrum of these different roles between business, very strong business acumen, or very strong software engineering needs. There are different ways to talk about data scientists, but for me, it's the one that is most practical to differentiate those four categories. So on the analytics side, we have someone that really will have to be able to identify the what and the why with the collaborators, with the analyst and the data scientist, while on the engineering side, it's more closer to software development and engineering. And this is also a very important point, is that at the end, what we need to do is to really integrate data people within the entire ecosystem of the company. So a siloed independent department, siloed independent department is just not enough. And that's really, if you want to look at high performance team, like in Formula One, for instance, you need to have everyone very focusing on one particular skills and tasks. And that's how you basically end up to be performing. Same applies for any teams, and there's no reason to leave data out of there, right? So you want to build a cross-functional team that include the data people inside the function. And it's a bit like a scrum in rugby. It looks like a big pack of people, like a mess, but actually in the scrum, everyone has a particular role to play. And essentially what we see also in cross-functional team. So you need to have basically your front-end, back-end, product owners, data engineer, machine learning engineer, data scientists working together, or on the business side, your business partners, business analyst, marketeer, working with the data scientists directly. So you want really to embed the data people within cross-functional teams as much as possible and not leave them outside. First, because you enhance ownership and responsibilities, it's driven by the group. Secondly, you minimize the needs for requirements request, which is a killer. So what are the requirements that you have from business, and then having transferred to the data people and to the product people that's in this loop. So it needs to be driven by business outcome. Again, minimizing the synchronization between different silos, so avoiding overheads of meetings, and essentially also focusing on delivering a product. So the fast iteration cycles I mentioned before are enabled only if we have end-to-end views. So if we can really from A to Z and be able to develop the product or to come up to the conclusion that is brought to our customers, for instance. So efficiency and agility is enhanced. Also reactivity. So in the context of COVID, for instance, the fact that we are working already in cross-functional team when we had to all stay from home didn't really change any ways of working anymore, because everyone knows what it needs to do. We already had our different meetings and ceremonies in place, and when this crisis struck, that barely impacted actually the efficiency of the teams. And it was a very, very strong point for us to be more resilient through the crisis. Actually, today, many part of the team are still working mostly from home. And we are exploring at HRS how we're going to move forward from this. And you don't have to hire at all costs. Of course, it's important to bring new people in there, but you need also to think about how to upskill your people. A good data engineer can be actually a very good backend engineer that is trained with the right technology. Some of your business partners may be trained around analytics to be able to do deep dive themselves. So they're really, you need to leverage and upskill the entire company, not only the people that you have in-house. And it's also a good idea to get a larger continuum, so integrating partnership with universities and career development programs for internal trainings, so boot camps in your company to upskill people, but also bring working with students as early as possible, brew inside the company, because at the end, as I said, the culture is the most important thing. So if you get the right people and get them adapted to the culture as soon as possible, then the rest, technology and skills, can be learned in training. I want to finish with a couple of notes on organizations. So I mentioned several cross-functional teams, the silos, etc. So how we can really organize ourselves in the company to enable all the different type of requirements, let's say, as an organizations. So I'm a fervent believer of, let's say, decentralization. So I really think that the relevant data people needs to be working in their cross-functional teams in the business units to deliver as much value as possible. But it comes with a lot of caveats. And one of them, for me, the most principal one, is that it's getting very difficult then to maintain the same quality, to make sure that the same principles and guidelines and conventions are spread around the company, so it doesn't help with your governance. And there are certain aspects like curation of data in data warehouse that needs to be centralized. So actually what you want to put in place is a hybrid model with a strong central team that's essentially covering, let's say, advanced analytics, business intelligence, and platform infrastructure to make sure that everyone share the platform. And then having also delocalized or decentralized functions of data within the different business units with their own, let's say, machine learning engineer, data engineer, and create some sort of connections between those different people by guilds or community of practices, for instance. That's basically combining the best of both worlds, and that's what we are trying to install in HRS. We're currently in the earlier phase than this. We are still very much centralized, but what we are trying to develop is more and more, let's say, collaboration with the other business units. So just to finalize that thought is basically the different stages of evolution that you want to put in place in an organization. So you do, as we are doing currently at HRS, start with a central data team that is somehow identifying lighthouse program with some of the business partners. Let's say the one that are the most ready for collaboration, maybe not the most important use case, or not the one that brings the most value at the company, but for me the most important is to make sure that you pick up a collaboration with a team that's more ready to work with you. It's for me, of course, if the two other boxes are ticked, it's better. But at the end, you want to make sure that the collaboration is working well and you can demonstrate the value added by working this way. Then you can move in a stage of a more general collaboration, so you can start putting processes of how to work with the central, decentralized, and start updating some of the data people in the business unit. And at the end, you can basically extend that to a fully decentralized, centralized model with a central team focusing on a few aspects, including platform mostly, and central data warehousing and central BI, and having most of the data people spread in the business units. So this is the 3 stages that need to be followed to be able to, at the same time, onboard the people, train the people, change the culture, but also ramp up and set up the right technology in place. And with those words, I would like to thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any question you may have about my talk. You can contact me anytime, and be a pleasure to meet you, or remotely or in person in the future. Thank you very much.